You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch UK Radio.
Hey up, my lovelies. How are we? Who's having to swim everywhere at the moment? It's a bit damp out there in the old UK. I don't know what it's like in different parts, but down here, down south... Oh, you say hello to Kerry Ness, but not to me? Thank you. Huh? Favouritism. God. And, yeah, I'm only live for a few minutes, girls. Don't worry. Thank you for joining me. But, oh my gosh, how is it? Is it wet down down south, down in the southwest, Corinne? Because it's blooming soggy in Essex, I tell you. It can go and do one as far as I'm concerned. But anyway... What have I been up to? It's been quite quiet, actually. I've been sort of conserving my energy because I'm out on Saturday on a... Well, they don't know where we're going. The girls from the Paranormal Sisters. We're going somewhere. Oh, well, at least it's not favouritism. You know, it's raining everywhere. We need to get someone from the north, say Scotland, on. Tell me if it's raining up there. But anyway, so... Yep, this weekend I'm off to somewhere secret. We're gonna do a bit of an experiment, bit of filming with some of the girls from the Paranormal Sisters, and they don't know where we're going. They're only getting the address on Friday night, and then they won't know. All they'll get is the postcode for where they've got to meet. It's gonna be fun. Some right interesting little corkers I researched today. But apart from that, I know what else. A lovely Mr. Neil Packer from the Haunted Antiquesy Museum in Hinckley. I'm going to be on his radio show tomorrow night at 6 o'clock on the Parology Hour. So if you're not doing anything, pop over there. You can catch it on his Facebook page. Have a listen to that. And then a couple of hours after that finishes, you can check out the Parasearch Radio show. What more could you want? Well, possibly to listen to the interview that I did with Mr. Richard Estep the other day. I'm afraid this isn't live, but I'm sure if you have got any messages for him, I can pass them on. Enjoy. And hello, and it's Haunted Histories. It's Wednesday. It's Penny G. Morgan. And my guest this week is a good friend of mine. Well, I'd like to think he's a good friend of mine. He's probably going to tell me yes or no in the background in a second, but I'd like to think he's a good friend of mine. He's talking to us all the way from Colorado. It's Mr. Richard Estep. Sorry, Rich. How are you doing?
Good, Penny. How's the memory?
Shocking. I hadn't put it on Facebook. I couldn't remember it.
Oh, that makes sense.
Got it. I've been calling you Estep for 2 years. You're going to give me a little chance to get it correct.
All right, that's your last one, okay?
It's my last one, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what are you going to call me?
I've got a few. None of them I really could put on air.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
I'll try and remember. I remembered writing the foreword for your new book.
Oh, that was a nice plug. Way to get that in there.
I know. I'm trying to help here. Well, this isn't the current book that we're talking about. This is the book. This one that I've written the foreword for is the one we talked about back in May, wasn't it? We talked about Bodmin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I've written the foreword for his book for that one, and good fun to write it was. But I did have to get in the fact that you've got a very dry sense of humour, and you do like to take the piss out of people, basically.
Yeah, I don't think it's that dry, honestly. I think it's just a English school system circa 1970s sense of humour. I never outgrew it.
Well, yeah. I think it's quite dry, but it's dry in a good way. You are, yeah. You like a laugh, don't you?
Well, who doesn't?
Exactly. Well, Richard's on our show tonight to be talking about another book he's got coming out. I mean, let's face it, this guy is pretty prolific when it comes to releasing his various tomes. And this one is on a school, and it's a school in Iowa. Is that the right?
That is right.
Yeah, I was going to say county, but it's Polk County, isn't it? I love that. Polk County in Iowa. And it's is it pronounced Farrar or Farrar?
Farrar.
The Farrar School in Polk County, Iowa. Now, for those of us who are not familiar, shall we say, with American geography, whereabouts in the US is Iowa?
It's pretty central. I always think of it as because I come from Leicester, I think of it as the Midlands of the US. That kind of works for me. Right now, as I live in Colorado, I think of it as being 2 states east.
Okay.
Because whenever I make that drive,
So what states do you go through to get to it?
So on the way to Iowa, you mainly drive through, I go way east through the plains here in Colorado, and then all of Nebraska.
Okay.
Which Nebraska, I'm sure is it's very nice, but all I see is the motorway, so it's like seeing the M1, And so it was hours and hours and hours of driving across relatively empty space to get there, with one good laugh along the way, because the weekend that I last went out that way, the Han Solo movie had just come out. Me being a huge Star Wars fan. And the transportation people in Nebraska had put up, those digital billboards that you see everywhere, and it said, "Slow down, people, you are not Han Solo," which I thought was great.
That's got to have a mention in the book, surely.
Yeah. Actually, that did not get a mention in the book.
No?
No.
I thought you'd want to throw that one in there.
Yeah, it's amazing what I forget to put in sometimes.
Has the foreword been written yet?
I
Have you asked the person writing the foreword to put it in?
Yeah, I wrote this book with E. Benson, who was a fellow investigator on the trip with me, and along with Stephen, our favourite ghost hunting Catholic priest / cellist.
We love Stephen. Yeah.
I only just realised I was watching the Grand Tour the other day. The Top Gear, as it really is.
Yep.
And I just realised, oh my God, this is basically what we did. This was one big episode of Top Gear with a haunted school and an axe murder house and a haunted prison on it. 3 middle-aged fat blokes go on this long road trip and have all kinds of adventures with ghosts.
I'd watch it.
Honestly, I think I'd like to see the Top Gear lads. I'd like to see Clarkson do a haunted trip at some point. It's one of the few things they haven't done, isn't it?
It's actually a good idea. Maybe we should suggest that to them.
It's a ghost, you blithering idiot. I would definitely.
You see, I'm one of the weird women. I actually love Jeremy Clarkson. I think he's brilliant. I know he's a sexist, misogynistic sod, but he's so quick and he's so funny. And yeah, I remember I saw him once. It was when Des O'Connor used to have his own chat show, and the company I worked for, it was about 22 years ago, so it's a while. We're talking a while ago here. They had arranged for us to all go and watch a filming of Des O'Connor over in Teddington, I think it was, somewhere like that, West London way. And Clarkson was one of his guests, and he was telling a story about when he'd gone to Norfolk to film a segment for Top Gear, and he'd gone into this petrol station to pay for his petrol, and he'd handed over his credit card to the cashier, and the cashier had just looked at you and goes, "What be this then?" and put it in the machine, put it into the till as though it was. And because I grew up in Norfolk, and even then there were still the odd petrol station like that they would look at a credit card and sort of, "What be this witchcraft then?" And it was just, I just found him hilarious, and I always have. So he is
and you would be the most haunted place in the world with Jeremy Clarkson doing it.
Oh, it would be so cool. It would be so cool.
So to anybody listening from Norfolk, by the way, that's Penny slagging you off, not me. I have very happy memories of running around Thetford Forest with the TA living in holes and getting rained on.
You see, I know someone who was on armed training in Thetford Forest, and he lost his bloody gun in Thetford Forest and never found it. So, yeah. But I'm allowed to say that. I lived there for 20-odd years. I can say what I think about Norfolk.
And of course, we're forgetting Norfolk's greatest contribution, I think, Alan Partridge.
Well, yes. We love Alan, even though he's played by a Mancunian. But yes, we love Alan. No, there are some very cool things in Norfolk. Very cool things. And I do like going back there to visit my family there, my parents. But yeah, it was just very funny.
Now that we've talked about Des O'Connor, of all people, Alan Partridge, I think the entire American listenership is scratching their heads.
Going who?
Going who, what happened? What is this show I tuned into?
Do you not get Alan Partridge in the US? I thought he'd be quite popular over there, isn't
well,
he?
I'm a Partridge fan, so I import the DVDs. My wife detests him with...
Really?
She detests Alan Partridge. I love him. I think he's brilliant. But he's very polarizing, isn't he?
He is. I've always loved him, but then again, I kind of get the joke, having grown up in Norfolk with like the radio shows and everything else, and From Me to You, aha, and all that stuff. Yeah, I get it.
There are some slight similarities between him and my father-in-law, and my challenge, my mission this Thanksgiving when we get together is to show him an Alan Partridge episode and see if I can convince him it's a documentary, that it's not satire, and I think I might have a chance.
I think you probably would.
See how that goes.
You probably would. I think I think quite a few people would fall for it if they didn't actually know who he was. The other one to see if your father-in-law would fall for is Spinal Tap.
Oh, he's pretty savvy with Spinal Tap.
Oh, is he? Because I've managed to get people to fall for that and think it was real.
Well, with the headlines these days, I mean, it's kind of tough, isn't it, to write satire that is beyond what we're actually seeing coming out of.
Very true. Very true. Very true. But so we've come up with a new TV idea for the former presenters of Top Gear, which I think we should take on the executive producer roles on, Richard. Because it's our idea.
Mm-hmm.
Our idea. So if anyone knows the guys from the former Top Gear presenters, let them know we've got a cracking idea for a show for them, and that we will talk them through how where they need to go. But back to being serious for a split second, and back to the American version of the Grand Tour with yourself, Stephen, and
Eric.
I would say, does he prefer E.E. Benson or Eric? He's an Eric. We'll call him Eric.
So Eric writes as E.E. Benson and
is known as Eric.
It's referred to as Eric in person, yeah.
Among other things.
That's true.
The dog.
I'm not going down that road again. I've done this to him too many times. You know what? No, we have to do it. So this shows what a horrible human being I can be. So Eric sounds quite a bit like Brian, the dog from Family Guy.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, all right, a lot. I mean, if you don't believe me, just talk to him. And I think, Penny, you'll vouch for me on this.
Well, listen to the show I did with him last year, and you'll hear it. I swear Seth MacFarlane took his voice.
And I have a cardboard cutout of Brian Griffin that I got years ago. So Eric came to pick me up. I'd been working on the ambulance the night before our road trip, so I was half asleep. And he was a warrior. This guy drove like the entire way for us.
Did he?
Yeah, the guy was a machine. He does long road trips on motorbikes. So
he does, yeah.
So he turns up to pick me up at my house, and sitting at my dinner table is the cardboard cutout of Brian holding a copy of Eric's book. I won't tell you what he said, but Eric has a great sense of humor, but I do not want to push him too far.
So I know what's going to happen if I ever come over to Colorado and come to your house. You're going to have a church archway over your toilet, aren't you?
It might be difficult to construct that, but
a cardboard one.
I'm sure we can find a church doorway or a cathedral that you can do your usual squat in.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we've all got to have a joke and we've all got to have a laugh. But yes, he does sound like Brian, and I swear Seth MacFarlane basically talked to him on the phone and thought that would be a good voice for Brian Griffin. I'm sure of it. But back to Farrar. Now, I googled the shit out of this place to try and find some really good historical facts. There's not a lot.
No. And one of the biggest questions about Farrar, and I've asked a lot of people about this doing research for the book, as did Eric. One of the biggest questions we had was, why is this place haunted in the first place? And everybody has some kind of theory, but a lot of people have said, you know what, we just have no idea. It's about 100 years old, the school. Was open for about a century. But you've got no tragedy there, you have no massacre there, you have no, horrific. And yet the place is so paranormally active, it's kind of crazy. The Farrar itself, you're looking at a very small township. You've got maybe 15 people live there. So you use scattered houses. You've got one cemetery, which is about the size of some people's back gardens. And nothing else. The school, So, I mean, there are all kinds of theories as to why that might be the case, but it's probably the biggest unanswered question.
Yeah.
The stuff we did find out about the history that fascinated me was the high school gymnasium there, the gym, I should say, downstairs. The Harlem Globetrotters came there and played, which I thought was kind of cool.
Very cool. Well, it had quite a lot of basketball. In fact, the newspaper articles I found, the girls' basketball team was more successful than the boys.
Yeah, go girls.
And I found quite a few newspaper articles from like the 50s and 60s when I was trawling the newspaper archives that were saying, both teams from the school competed. The girls were successful yet again, the boys weren't, and there was pictures of the girls' basketball team online. So that's quite sort of girl power. But yeah, the Harlem Globetrotters, that would be a very cool. But I think if the team, the girls were that successful, maybe it was done as a sort of publicity thing. I don't know. What I did find out about was that the school was commenced being built in 1921, and it was an amalgamation back then, back in the sort of turn of the last century. Most of these sort of small little towns had like a one-room schoolhouse where every child from the ages of 5 to 16 would be sat in the same room learning different things. And what they decided sort of pretty much after the First World War was, why don't we amalgamate loads of these small towns and have one big schoolhouse and sort of incorporate it? And they chose to do it in Farrar because Clark Geddes, or he's sometimes known as Gamble Clark rather than Clark Gamble Geddes, who was a local farmer, donated 6 acres of his land to build the new schoolhouse on at a cost of something like $100,000 back in 1921, which did actually upset quite a few people that much money was being spent on a schoolhouse, whereas what was wrong with the old ones. So that might have produced some of the sort of the reason there was animosity that money was being spent, but that seems a bit of a trivial reason for haunting.
I would be amazed if that played any role in it, honestly.
I'm going through things here, just trying to pick at straws to see what. But so that was quite interesting. Now Clark himself, or Gamble as he was sometimes known, he actually died at 55. He didn't, but all his descendants have stayed in that area because I traced their family tree because I'm that boring. And Geddes isn't that common a surname, so I managed to actually find quite a lot of his descendants.
You're like Olympic level stalker on the show, aren't you?
I can be. Yeah, worry. People should worry if they upset me. Really should worry. I just find it interesting because you never know what you're going to dig up when you start following someone's information. But anyway, so he actually only died. He died in 1924. So his donation of land, he only saw the school there for 2 years before he passed away.
But it's a magnificent legacy, isn't it?
Isn't it just? I think so.
Because
so I'm wondering if maybe he's there.
I'm
wondering if maybe he's one of the spirits there because he's proud of what he achieved. I don't know. Speculation. But the school opened on the 1st of April 1922. And I think it covered everything from 1st to 12th grade. And it had 150 children when it first opened, covering all those grades, according to the newspaper reports I was reading. And that's pretty much it. I'm trying to find the lists of previous principals. I think the Holy Grail would be easier to find. I found 2 names. one of which I'm not going to tell you it just now because I'm going to mention some of the stuff you put in the recent Haunted magazine article, but we'll get to that. But also I found some of the rumours that are unsubstantiated about the place. Now, I don't know if you've heard some of these. There's a rumour of the Ku Klux Klan, I can never say this, the Ku Klux Klan having burnt a cross on the school wall.
Okay.
I don't know if you'd
I
heard
had
that
that
one.
rumor, yeah. It's not something I put in the book purely because I didn't want to sensationalize it too much.
No.
You know, but that does make sense.
It does make sense, but I tried to look for anything to substantiate it. I went back through newspaper reports from 1925 onwards. Mm-hmm. And what I did find out was the KKK, that's easier for me to say, the KKK, or the K cubed, they did have quite a strong presence in Iowa in the early 30s. Mm-hmm. They were doing an almost, as the reports are, historical reports I was reading, they were trying to almost do a divide and conquer and split the community. So they ostracised the Jews, and they were kind of supporting. They were like giving money to black communities to try and get the black community to sympathise with them, until somebody in the black community said, "Hang on, why are you doing this?" And then they realised what they were doing. So they were in Iowa, in the smaller towns in Iowa in the 1930s, but I can't find any substantiation that they actually burnt a cross on the school wall. So I couldn't.
And true or not, I don't see that would contribute to this to the haunting in any real way, shape, or form. You know?
No, I agree. The other one that seems to prevail when you Google stories is that pupils were abused at the school.
So, again, that's a rumour that I've heard out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you mentioned it in the article, didn't you, in Haunted Man?
Yeah, and I've heard it from many schools. You know, you can hear this from a lot of schools around the world. And I didn't find any substantiating evidence to corroborate it.
No, I didn't. I just, as you say, it's one of those things you always seem to hear. Certain places seem to always have the same rumour that goes around about it. So schools, it's that kids were abused.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hospitals is there's always an angel of death working there. Is one.
It's become a trope, hasn't it? Kind of. But with school, it's interesting. One of the things I did think about was that school days were not everybody's happiest days of their lives. Although there's that. We kind of look back on our own school days with rose-tinted glasses, don't we? Mm-hmm. I mean, I was a child of the 70s, and school was not nearly as harsh as it was just 10 years before.
No.
But, you know, canings and those kind of things were not at all uncommon. The thing is, it's happened everywhere.
Yep.
So why doesn't every single school report this level of paranormal activity if that's what the cause? It makes no sense to me.
No.
There has to be something more.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, we're the same age, aren't we? We were both raised through the same school system, in effect, in the UK. And yeah, there's things I look back at now that we dealt with at school that schools now would get sued if they did to a child. But that's just because schooling's changed. Same as when you look back 10, 20, 30 years, you see how kids were treated, and you think, you know, putting a dunce cap on a child would be considered child abuse now. Whereas back 20, 30 years ago, it was the norm. So it's all comparative, not comparative. You know what I mean? It's all relating to the time. But I couldn't find relative. Thank you. I couldn't find any stories to do with Farrar that showed any kind of. And I say I looked from the newspapers from about 1925 through to 2002. And I couldn't find any accounts of investigations, anything like that, which, if there had been, especially from the 1980s onwards, it would have been documented somewhere. So I'm just wondering if it was maybe, you know, it was kids who'd been, I say you mentioned this in the article, kids who'd been, say bullied or had just had a bad time of it at school and felt hard done by. Just, you know, they didn't enjoy school, or maybe they were the troublemakers and they were told off a lot and they were put on detention and they were put into a room on their own and all that kind of stuff. And there's, you know, they feel hard done by. I don't know. But again, there's nothing specific that would make you think there's some kind of overriding...
Not a thing that we could find. And like I said, there's so much rumor there, but once you start digging into it, get past all of the hearsay and things of that nature, I'm unable to explain why that school is haunted. And I talked to people that had investigated for far longer than we did, and pretty much nobody knows for sure why this building is so active. But everybody agrees that it is.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it, too, is it's relatively unspoiled. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, especially it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
John Tenney is the guy that said to me, nobody just happens to drop by at Farrar. You have to set out to go there.
Yeah.
It's one of those places you're never going to be just passing through.
Yeah.
Kind of like Villisca in that regard.
Right.
Which we also did on that same trip.
Yeah.
So you have to go out of your way to get there. And once you kind of do get there, you are in the middle of nowhere. It's very, very isolated.
Right.
And so Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, Paranormal Lockdown, none of those shows have been to the school yet, which frankly amazes me.
Well, I was surprised when I was looking at the lineage on their website of different people that have been there. I mean, there are some well-known names, like you say, John Tenney, Chad Lindbergh. Yeah, I think the Kling brothers have been there as well, haven't they? But I was quite surprised that what I would call the big three shows have never thought to go there. And I did wonder why that was.
Ghost Stalkers did it, I enjoyed that show. It was one of the shows I think died before its time, with John Tenney and Chad Lindbergh. They're how I learned about the place, first of all.
Yeah.
But again, it's relatively unsullied and unspoiled by, as you say, the big three, the bigger shows. And it's just incredible. And I don't think that will... I predict... I don't have any inside information, but I predict that will change before you know it. It's one of those kind of best open secrets now.
Yeah. That
this is a very active location. It's easy to control in terms of you're not in the middle of a neighborhood. So noise pollution, noise contamination is not a concern.
Yeah.
At Farrar, which is a real luxury for a paranormal investigator, as we know.
Definitely. So the owners actually live there, though. The people who bought the building actually live on site, don't they? They have their own apartment in the building.
They do. Jim and Nancy, the nicest people. They live on site. They have a great attitude about the place. They are very friendly and welcoming to paranormal investigators, just so long as they're respectful. And what I like is that they're not trying to sell you anything, and they're not trying to sell you a bill of goods. They welcome you in and say, see what you can find out. We'd be interested to hear. So it's pretty cool. And I like that it's essentially a self-contained lab.
Yeah. That
you go do your experiments there and know that with the exception of things like one or two snakes,
which we'll talk about that.
by far the most terrifying thing, that you're going to be pretty much undisturbed.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about the snakes because, I mean, I'm referring to the article you've got in this month's Haunted magazine, of which I have an article in too again, but, we can talk about that. But I'm referring to the article, and obviously it's because you got the book coming out. Is it towards the end of this month, the book?
Yeah, it should be out soon.
It is this month then, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, this month.
Yeah, sorry. I lost you then. I didn't hear what you said. That's why. So, reading the article, and this actually isn't where I did my research from. I do hasten to add, I did actually do research as well as read this article. But there's a bit when you've said that it feels quite nice. It feels quite normal. Until you were led by Will into the boiler room. And you say, now, we won't talk about... I am going to say what you actually said, because I may phrase it slightly differently and not actually say the whole word, because there's certain words I can get away with saying on this show, and other words that, my evil queen doesn't like. But, and you said that the atmosphere shifted in this boiler room, and this is before you... It's basically, your actual words were you saw something move out the corner of your eye and realised it was a very large snake. And apparently Will, Stephen and Eric were just like, nah, it's a snake, whereas you weren't too impressed.
You know what? I like to remind myself that even Indiana Jones did not like snakes. Because it was that level of reaction, It was... we're in the boiler. It's a Will, the caretaker, amazing bloke, really nice guy, looks after that place, knows pretty much everything there is to know about the paranormal activity there. So he's a superb guy to have.
Yeah.
And he loves the place so much, he got married there.
Oh, wow.
That's how attached he is to the place. So he's taking us around. We go down to the basement. And I've heard some pretty spine-chilling stories about the basement, the boiler room. And it does look like the kind of place where Freddy Krueger takes his victims.
I was going to say, is it something like Nightmare out of Elm Street?
Yeah, absolutely. If you picture that, you're in the right track.
Yeah.
And so I'm just doing that thing where I'm looking around, it's dark. And you know how it is. You see more with the rods and cones in your peripheral vision than you do looking straight ahead.
Yeah.
So I just catch movement out of the corner of my eye on top of one of the, I think it's a water tank or a boiler or a heater, something like that. A tank anyway. And I just turn to look, and it's this bloody great big snake. And I'm like, snake! So yeah, it was definitely a like brown trousers moment for me. And Stephen and Eric are just unimpressed, they just whatever. And Will just says, "Oh yeah, we had an 8-footer last week in here. This is only like a 4-footer. It's just a bull snake." I'm like, "Just a bull snake?" And he said, "Oh yeah, they're not poisonous. It's a dry bite." And I'm like, "I feel like you're missing the point here. I'll see you in the gym."
You see, I'd have been fascinated. I'd have been looking at it.
Yeah. I like to be fascinated from a distance.
You see, my fear of birds. When I found that pigeon that was in the prison when we were there, and I thought maybe it was a model until I saw it move, and I was like down those stairs, and it's a pigeon. I'm like that with birds, snakes, especially one that's not venomous. I'm not that fazed.
And each to their own, right? This one,
it makes the world go round.
I was not thrilled, let's just put it like that. So
what were some of these stories about the boiler room that you'd heard that weren't very pleasant?
Well, like, for example, I talked to a friend of mine called Seth Olney, who's a filmmaker, and is well worth checking out his work if you're into the paranormal. Mm-hmm. And Seth had done some tours there over the years. He'd also spent some time investigating the place, and he told me that the atmosphere in the boiler room has been shifting recently, that it's been getting more and more negative. So people are reporting objects being thrown in there at investigators, objects being thrown and nearly hitting them. They're talking about shadow figures. They're talking about light anomalies, those sorts of things. Problem is, you're working in near complete darkness, and the eyes and the mind like to play tricks in those kind of conditions. Yeah, it's also kind of dank and stuff. So it wasn't a part of the building I wanted to spend too much time in anyway. Will, on the other hand, when he does public investigations at Farrar, he'll use the boiler room as a sensory deprivation experiment. He will put people in there blindfolded.
Whoa.
Rather him than me, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So we focused a lot of our time and energy on the gym, but by far the most active part of Farrar is the third floor, the upper floor.
And that's the one that's got the 4 classrooms and the auditorium and the stage on it.
Yeah, the big auditorium with the stage, which I'd say we got a lot of our activity there. But there's something about the school that it almost plays games with you. Mm-hmm. And I'd heard this a lot. I'd heard cat and mouse a lot from people that investigated there first. And you do see this with some haunted properties. A lot of your listeners are paranormal investigators, and I'm sure they've had this experience where you go up to the 3rd floor and something starts making noise on the 1st. You go down to the 1st, there's something in the basement. You go down to the basement, there's something on the 2nd.
Well, I know that's one of the things Josh and you both, Josh Hurd and yourself, have both said about Malvern, isn't it? It's cat and mouse there. There was another location you told me likes to do that as well. Could it be Asylum 49? Is that a lot?
Honestly, it's a lot of the places I've investigated. I'd say it's more the norm than the exception. I think. But one thing that John Tenney pointed out to me, which I'd never really considered before, John said that in Farrar, you never have more than one paranormal experience or potentially paranormal experience going on at the same time. It's as if whatever's there cannot multitask. So they've had these big investigations, public events, where they have people scattered throughout the school and grounds. And when they start tracing the timelines, only one group of people or one location seems to have strange things happening at any given moment. Well, and it happened to us at Farrar. We decided to go solo, so Eric and Stephen and I would split up, and then Stephen would ask us half an hour later, which one of you was screaming? I heard screaming. Right. And it was coming from a point where Eric and I should both have heard it, and didn't. So it's kind of interesting that these things seem very localized at Farrar to one specific spot at a time.
Okay. But you're saying the third floor does seem to be the most active of the buildings.
But for the most bang for your buck, the third floor, which is where the principal's office is located. And the principal is this big figure that I think many believe to be at the heart of the Farrar haunting. It's an assumption, by the way. He's called the principal, or it's called the principal. I don't even know for sure that it's a he, because you're looking at a very large shadow figure. In most cases, in one case, he's been seen as a full-bodied apparition by one group. But the majority of people see him as this large shadow figure that is most active near the old principal's office, which is on the third floor at the top of some stairs. And he seems to play a very protective role at Farrar. Okay.
Well, I said to you that I'd tried finding names of the principals at Farrar, and I think finding the Holy Grail would have been easier.
If you found them, I'd say don't air them, Penny.
You don't want to air them?
No, just in case you have family members listening in.
Okay.
Because one of the last things I'd want to do is cause distress to somebody.
Okay.
Well, all
right. Well, I'll tell you this much then. There was a female principal mentioned in the newspapers in 1934. And there's a reason I'm telling you that. And can you help me out with the American school system? The superintendent, is that like a super principal, or is that like a person who covers more than one school?
I actually couldn't tell you because I didn't go to school here.
Oh, I didn't know if you knew sort of from over
It's
here.
one of those things I've never paid attention to.
Okay. Well, there's also a male school's superintendent who's mentioned an awful lot in the newspapers throughout the 1950s and late 40s to do with the school. A lot. So there's a reason I am mentioning those to you for a reason, and we can talk off air about them. That's fine if you don't want me to mention the names. But there's a female principal mentioned in the newspapers in 1934, and this male mentioned sort of 20 odd years later, an awful lot over like a 10-12 year period as being in connection with the school, which I found quite interesting. But they were the only ones I could find. Now, the other thing I did find is a rumour, and this, I mean, these are not pleasant facts, and there might be family members still alive, but it's all online, it's all documented, it's a tragic story. But there's an awful lot of story. I read some investigators saying, oh yeah, a child was killed at the school, and that's why, there's at least reports of one death of a child. I couldn't find one.
Nor could I.
Yeah, the only thing I could find, and this accident happened 20 kilometres, I think it was roughly away from Farrar, in a place called, I don't know whether they'd pronounce it Berwick or Berwick. We'd pronounce it Berwick in this country, but Berwick. And it was a little boy who I think how old he was. He was about 11, and he was playing in the playground at his school in Berwick, and basically he was playing like a rough and tumble game with his friends, and he was killed accidentally whilst playing this game.
20 kilometres?
About 20 kilometres away. But what was even more tragic about this case is his dad had died, and this was in 1951. His dad had died in the October of 1945 when he was out hunting from a gunshot wound to his chest, an accidental shotgun wound to his chest, 6 years previously, which is tragic.
It is.
So his poor mum, Irene, and the reason it linked in with Farrar is that her family were a known farming family from Farrar, and she went to Farrar School.
She being?
The mum.
Okay.
who lost her husband and her son.
I call that a pretty tenuous link at best.
Exactly. That is the nearest thing I could find. The nearest.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, every school, every location like this, you have some kind of rumor. The myths and legends grow around places like this, and when you look at what's verifiable, there's just not a lot that is that can explain this haunting. Or if there is, I've been unable to find it. That's what I feel comfortable saying.
Well,
I have not been.
Yeah, I put my best stalker hat on today to find, and that was the closest thing I could find to a tragic death related to that school. That is the nearest I could find.
But I mean, if we flip it around, one of the discussions I've had about haunted locations with people is we tend to look at negative hauntings, right? We tend to look at places full of tragedy and darkness and death, but we also see thousands of cases in which a place is haunted because people were very happy there. They have very fond memories.
Yeah.
You know, before the era of paranormal TV, when everything was demonic and dark and negative, you look at the books of somebody like Peter Underwood would be a great example, or Andrew Green.
Yeah.
And they had hundreds of cases in which, you know, these houses were haunted by a past resident who was just really happy there.
Yeah.
And it seems positive energy that is at the heart of those cases. And it may be that way with Farrar. Maybe a lot of kids had such a good time at that school that has left its own residual imprint.
That was exactly what I was going to actually come on to. So you read my mind there, actually. But it could be that this principal that people see is one that was just so damn proud of their school and damn proud of what it was doing, they want to stay. You know, not from a nefarious point of view, not from a like you say, sort of demonic or anything else. It was just from, I loved my school, I adored my school, I don't want to leave. Or the children, it could have been those children who it was the happiest time of their life. I mean, you got to think about it in this instance. The school opened 8-9 years before the Depression.
Exactly that. It may have been the one point of stability that some of those kids ever had.
Exactly. Or those girls who were winning the basketball competitions in the 40s and 50s, who came out of school and were basically told, no, you can't do things like that. You go get married and have children. They've gone back there because that's when they had fun. That's when they were allowed to, if you pardon the phrase, let the hair down. You know, they didn't have to follow social protocols. They were doing something that was a bit different. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think we focus too much on the negative reasons for hauntings as opposed to the positive, that they just are attracted to the place and want to go back.
Well, it's kind of sad, isn't it, that unfortunately that's the kind of thing that sells these days, that when nobody really seems to want to watch a ghost show in which they go and investigate a warm, friendly, happy case. No, that's not good for ratings. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. And
I think we, the viewers of those kind of shows, and the people that make them, also, we kind of are culpable in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the viewership, I think, are not clamoring for something positive. And I would love to think that that's the heart of the Farrar haunting, that it was happy. I mean, the Stanley Hotel, where I've done ghost tours for several years, that's, I think, the primary reason why the Stanley is haunted, especially by children, is that so many people were happy there for so many years. You know, but there are also a couple of other theories about the principal that are a little more out of left field, which every bit is fascinating. Well, probably the architect of most of these theories is John Tenney. And if you don't know John, you should. He's a fascinating bloke who's done...
I enjoy listening to him, yeah.
He is. He's definitely one of my heroes in the field. And John is king of the unorthodox theory. And
that's an understatement.
And his theory about the principal is twofold. One is that the principal, whenever he's seen, is actually very tall and quite thin, as is the caretaker. Right. And so his theory is that the principal could actually be Will. That as we say, spirits are not constrained in space and time as we physical beings are. One of his theories is that Will could actually have died at some point in the future, hopefully many years from now, and has come back to the place that he's most fond of in all the world, the Farrar School, and is haunting himself.
Okay.
because the principal likes to follow Will around, keeping an eye on him, and he's very much a stalkery kind of a shadow figure. John saw him on the episode of Ghost Stalkers, in fact, and Eric, my fellow investigator, has also encountered what we believe to be the principal up near the principal's office. So John's theory is, he said to Will, you love this place so much, you got married here, man. You spend every spare moment in the school. You're very attached to this place. You are the caretaker here. Maybe you're going to be doing that forever. Which is an incredible, mind-blowing theory, isn't it?
It's logical. It is logical. Yeah, it's definitely... It makes sense. I mean, nobody knows for sure, do we? That's the whole point about this. It's all theory. It's all conjecture.
Well, and I interviewed one set of investigators that had seen the principal and said this wasn't a shadow figure. This was 100% a solid-looking apparition. And so I'm like, great, then you should be able to describe him to me. And so they did, and then I mentioned this theory to them, to the people that had seen the principal as a shadow, not as a shadow figure, as an apparition. I mentioned it to them. They went and looked at Will's Facebook page and saw some pictures of Will and said, that could be the guy.
Without you telling them that was John's theory?
So, no, that's the big thing. I had told them it was John's theory. Right, so I could easily predispose them, because we were just chatting about it. And then they'd mentioned, oh, we know Will. In fact, we're friends with him on Facebook. Went to look him up, saw some younger pictures of him, actually, and said, yeah, younger Will kind of looks like that guy that we saw.
Do you know what my theory is? Go
ahead.
It's like Scooby-Doo. It is actually Will, and those damn kids are going to pull his mask off.
Stranger things have happened, I guess.
Oh, it's a joke. That is a joke. So don't sue me, Farrar School people.
Will's listening. He'll be on the next plane.
Yeah,
but John's other theory is also a fascinating one, Penny. And so there are generally three entities that people seem to encounter at Farrar. Yeah. The principal's the best known.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff gets attributed to him. There have been some fairly violent incidents at the school on occasion.
Was it Johnny Hauser got shoved into some coke pegs or something?
Johnny Hauser got slammed pretty hard against a coke peg that was mounted in the wall. That slammed into the base of his neck, which could have been very nasty.
Yeah.
And there was another investigator I talked to, Lisa Cavanda, that was thrown across the room midway through a Ouija board session.
Wow.
Now, what's kind of interesting is that in addition to the principal, there's also kind of a nastier, or seems to be at least a little angrier entity known as the janitor. Mm-hmm. And then there is a third known as the librarian, who is supposed to be a female. And she is said to be very, if you're nice and respectful to my school, I'll be nice and respectful to you. She's more active in the old library. So John talks about this, and he said he thinks that this could be a kind of a triumvirate of spirits, may be the wrong word here. He said that in the same way we've had the Philip experiment, which I'm sure your listeners are all familiar with, where this entity was created.
Kind of conjured up, yeah.
Thought form, yeah. He said he thinks the school may have actually conjured up its own defense mechanism, for want of a better word, its own protectors, so that these three entities, because over the last however many years, it's been full of visitors traipsing through the hallways, some of them are more respectful than others, that the school's kind of reacting to that in a paranormal way. And so these three essentially thought forms are what people are encountering, that they may never have been living people at any point. And they've assumed these kind of facets, the librarian, the janitor, and the principal, the authority figure.
Yeah.
You have the brains of the outfit, kind of the librarian, the knowledge, the wisdom, and then you have the more aggressive kind of custodian. And that's an interesting thing.
Sorry, yeah. So do you think it was the librarian that you heard?
Yes, or at least I think she's a good candidate. I wouldn't say 100%. I think that she's as good a candidate as any.
Yeah, because as you meant, I don't know if you want to tell the story?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell the story. So another thing about this school, and it's a lesson that every paranormal investigator needs to learn, me included, you're never done with the investigation until you're in your car and you're off the property, right? Now, John Tenney had told me about an experience he'd had where he was doing an all-day investigation at the school. He's in there for 8 hours, something like that. Not a thing. Not a single EVP, not a single footstep or light anomaly, not a thing. So a wasted day, it seems. So just as he's leaving, his recorder's still running. John shakes his head and goes under his breath, "Oh, F this effing place."
Yeah.
You know? Goes home, listens to his audio. The most fun part of any investigation is evidence review, right?
Yeah.
And just as he says, "This effing place," a man's voice is heard and it says, "F you, Tenny." You know, which, if that's not something playing games, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
So we were just packing up for the night one night. We were in what's called the break room, where there's a microwave and a heater and an air conditioner, depending on the weather, and fridge. So we just stepped out into the hallway, and above us, there's a staircase, and above us on the 3rd floor, we hear somebody moving around. Mm-hmm. And of course, we packed all of our equipment away at this point. So I call up there and I go, "Hello?" Not expecting an answer. And every bit as real as I'm hearing your voice now, the three of us, we hear a woman's voice call back, "Hello?" And Stephen and Eric, to this day, imitate my facial expression when that happened.
Right.
Because it was jaw-dropping. I mean, it was, you know, this wasn't the wind. This was clearly a woman's voice. We went storming up to the 3rd floor to try and track it down. Of course, there was nobody there. There was nobody on any of the staircases. We went from room to room. We searched every closet. Nothing.
Yeah.
And we've been stupid enough to turn our recorders off just because we were leaving the building. So, you know, Jim and Nancy, who live on site, they generally don't come out at night. They certainly hadn't come out and gone up to the 3rd floor that night. Their place was all locked up.
Yeah.
And nobody had broken in. We were locked in the school. We were completely incarcerated, for want of a better term. So that, again, was another example, I think, of the school giving us a result because we've been respectful. You know, we've been very respectful that night, and I kind of think that might have been the librarian just giving us something.
Yeah, sounds it. It sounds it. So, would I be right in saying it's the kind of place that it's not got that kind of ominous feeling to it? It actually does feel like it was a place of quite good nature, quite sort of, not fun, I don't suppose is the right word, but...
Well, it could be. I mean, schools are fun. At least they can be. They can also not, depending on what's going on. You know, it's interesting. I think it changes. The atmosphere in there can change. I'm not a sensitive person, but I picked up on a couple of changes, like in the boiler room. Mm-hmm. How much of that is your own subconscious, though, and how much of it is something beyond that is always up for debate.
Yeah.
You know? But a lot of people that are sensitive, or at least claim to be, say that the school can change, that it can be completely different when you go in at 6 p.m. It can be completely different at midnight or 3 in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're actually doing, aren't you involved in a Paracon that's there?
Oh, yeah.
Next month?
Yeah, for any American listeners, come join us at Farrar at the Beyond the Grave Paracon. That's July 19th through 21st. Mm-hmm. I'm out there with Johnny Hauser, and a whole bunch of other paranormal investigators. That we're doing like a 3-day show and tell, and a chance to not only investigate the school but be there overnight.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Leaving school.
Yes. So I think I saw the advert for that on the Farrar School Facebook page. If anyone is interested in finding out more details, but that does look like it looks like a very good idea for a Paracon, and I'm presuming you'll have copies of your books.
Yeah, I'm heading to Malvern Manor the night before, the 19th.
Right. Is that close by then?
It's about an hour's drive.
Right.
I'll be doing a public event there with Kiefer Sutherland, with Josh Hurd. My buddy Josh.
Again, that's another joke. We have to explain that somebody turned. I actually said something. So I sent something to Josh the other day. I think it was on Twitter, and I said, "Hey Kiefer, how's it going?" And I got someone put, "His name's Josh." It was like, yeah, he gets the joke.
Josh has now heard it so much; it's old news to him. But So I'll be doing Malvern Manor on July the 19th. I think there are some tickets left of that. Book signing an overnight there, snatching a few hours sleep, driving to Farrar, lecturing at Farrar and signing on the 20th, and then doing an overnight investigation with the public. And then the following night, I take over the Villisca Axe Murder House for a night again, because that place fascinates me, and I really am excited about going back there.
Are you going to be there with Johnny?
So Johnny generally doesn't investigate at Villisca anymore. I think he's had his fill of investigating it. He's still the custodian, though. But I'd like to. I mean, last time I was there, Johnny walked into the house to say hello. He hadn't been there but 30 seconds, and the whole house shook as if a car had driven into it.
Yeah.
So Johnny's kind of a catalyst, and I'm hoping I'll at least get the opportunity to have him come over for a while to investigate with us.
Yeah, another cool part. You get to hang out with some very cool people, Mr. Estep.
I'm very fortunate in that regard.
I mean, Josh Hurd and Johnny Hauser are two people I would love to get the chance to hang out with. So yeah, I'm very jealous of the people you get to hang out with.
You can hang out with Josh. I mean, that will take place between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. You know, as 24 used to say. So you investigate with Josh in real time.
But I also that probably lost a lot of people. He looks like Kiefer Sutherland. People he has been mistaken for Kiefer Sutherland by people before, so hence the 24 link. But no, I would love to get a chance to hang out with people like Josh and Johnny House, and maybe one day I'll get the chance to do it. You never know what's around the corner, do you?
Get your ass on a plane.
Pardon?
You need to get your ass on a plane.
I do need to get my ass on a plane. Well, actually, I need to actually get the money to buy a plane ticket to then get my ass on a plane. It'll happen. Today. I have good feelings. About it. So the Farrar book is out towards the end of this month. It definitely sounds like it's worth, especially the fact you've co-written it with Eric. So we've got two writing styles there, two brilliant writing styles, and it's going to be very interesting. And as I say, you, Eric, and Stephen are such a laugh to sort of talk to and work with. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of humour in it, as well as fact and accounts and.
There is, and there's stuff that we didn't put in it. I mean, one that I'm even hesitant to talk about is the fart, but I will.
Is this the thing you played me when we met up in Cornwall?
It is. It's fair to say the three of us, I don't know what we'd eaten that night. I'll keep it tasteful, but there was some, shall we say, flatulence going on.
Some?
And remember being like a 6-year-old kid in school, finding fart humour so funny, somebody broke wind, and that was good for 5 minutes, solid laughter.
It was Stevens. It was Stevens.
Stevens' gastrointestinal challenge.
Yeah.
Well, so that happened, and of course it was immensely funny as far as we were concerned. But we were doing that. That happened in the gymnasium, and so Eric and I were falling about laughing. Of course, then Eric let one go, and I let one go, and it became this nasty, toxic miasma. But the point of it is that was exactly the kind of thing that schoolboys do and would have done in that school. Yeah. And I kind of wonder if the juvenile sense of humor that we brought to the table actually contributed in any way to priming the pump, if you will, as far as the paranormal activity was concerned.
Very possibly. Though I do remember you saying, I'm going to play you this sound clip when we were in Bodmin, but we had to wait for everyone else to leave the room in the pub that we were in before you played it. Because that is some melodic gastrointestinal functions coming out of Stephen. Yeah, the time it laid on that was some, that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and you want to be all right. You don't want to come across as being disrespectful, but in a school like that, I actually think it was perfect. I really, really do.
Probably.
Not the kind of thing you'd have done in a church or a hospital. It wouldn't have been appropriate. But when you're in a school. And you're thinking about that kind of school child humour. Mm-hmm. I say boy humour because girls are classier than boys are, I think.
We just do all that stuff in a different way.
Right. But I actually thought it fit perfectly. And we had an interesting active night that night too.
Yeah. Yeah, so what else are you up to then? What else have you got going on?
Right now, I'm heading out in 2 weeks to Alton, Illinois. I'm doing Troy Taylor's Haunted America conference. Cool. Hoping to meet a few listeners there. And at the same time, I'll be on the trail of John Wayne Gacy's ghost. Thing that's associated with another serial killer.
Is that for a new book, or is that for your encyclopedia that you're working on?
Yes. In other words, Gacy's going to go in my book of serial killers I'm contracted to write for next year. But when I heard there was a haunting associated with him, that seemed a great way to kill two birds with one stone, no pun intended. And so I'm going to cover the paranormal aspects of it in addition to the normal aspects of it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it could be him or it could be one of his victims, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Brad and Barry Kling got a pretty good EVP from this location that implies it is Gacy himself.
Right. And so what after that? What else? Obviously towards the end of July, you've got your Iowa road trip.
Yeah, and then in August, back to Gettysburg in August for the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash, a great charity event that supports wounded warrior, children with leukemia, cancer, those kind of things. So we'll be investigating in Gettysburg and meeting folks there. And then heading to Fort Mifflin on the Delaware, Philadelphia, for a Revolutionary War-themed ghost book.
And that's the one you're buzzing with excitement about, isn't it?
I'm excited to put on a red coat and take over a Civil War fort and see what happens. But it's also an immense privilege to be allowed to go into these places of historical import. Yeah. Fort Mifflin was nicknamed the fort that saved America.
Oh, right.
You know. And so it's a huge privilege and responsibility to be entrusted with that for a week.
Yeah.
So I'm actually doing 4 days and nights of investigation there, and then an investigation for the public on the 5th night, which will benefit the fort. So it's going to help support the fort maintenance and restoration. And, when you look at the history of that war, you look at how many British boys died so far from home, how many Americans died on their new land. You also have French and Germanic involvement in that war too. It's quite the melting pot of emotion, and I think it's going to be a very moving place to be.
Yes.
In all seriousness.
Yes. I mean, you know me with the history side of things. It's one of the things I love about doing the paranormal side is get to go into these beautiful historical places and tell their story, as you do. So it is something you want to do justice to, of which I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will, Mr. Estep.
Certainly do my level best.
Do you notice what I said just then?
I did. You got it right. How about that?
I'm really trying. I'm trying to do that thing that if I keep saying it, I'll remember.
You are trying, Penny. You are very trying. On that we agree. But we love you anyway.
Well, on that note, thank you ever so much for being my... I'm going to cut you off now. Thank you ever so much for being my guest tonight. Fancy coming back again soon? Yeah,
which location are we going to do next?
I think I've got possibly you, Wes, and Jason. I've got 3 of you to talk about Cripple Creek.
Excellent. So a haunted mine, a jail, and a Wild Western kind of themed show.
Wow.
That'll be awesome.
I'm going to have my work cut out for me controlling the 3 of you, aren't I?
You really, really are. In the meantime, though, I'm hoping that I'll see some of your listeners at the Farrar event the end of July. And whether I do or not, if you're a paranormal enthusiast here in the States, go check out Farrar and decide for yourself. You'll get a great welcome. It's a wonderful place.
Definitely.
And
we'll share their Facebook page as well, so people can drop them a line as well. But yes, the more we promote these places, the more funds they get coming in, the more they can stay open, basically, and share their story. And that's the important thing, isn't it?
That's 100% the important thing is the upkeep of these places. But also, I write a book about a place, or anybody writes a book about a haunted place. Once the book's over, the story still goes on, right? Yeah. And everyone that goes to Malvern Manor or Farrar or Villisca or wherever it is, you're kind of writing your own chapters in that story. Yeah. And I like the idea that this is a big dynamic thing.
Yeah.
That these places are still giving up their secrets to us and still have many more to give up.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Couldn't have said it better. Well, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye to Richard and say see you again soon.
See you, Ben.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Penny G. Morgan on Haunted Histories on Parasearch Radio. Don't forget, we have shows on 5 nights of the week. If you miss one of them, head on over to YouTube or head on over to our Spreaker channel and you can download and listen to them again. So, all that leaves me to say is thank you for listening. I will see you again next week, but have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.